The church was silent, a heavy quiet broken only by the sound of muffled sobs and the occasional creak of wooden pews. As people shifted in their seats, my hands trembled in my lap, clutching a folded tissue that had long ago surrendered to my tears. My husband's casket sat just a few feet away, a dark, polished reminder that the man I loved, the man who had been my only constant in this cruel world, was gone forever. Every breath I took felt like it dragged shards of glass through my lungs. Every passing second was another stab of the agonizing truth. I was now a widow, utterly alone. I thought the funeral would be the one sacred space my parents couldn't contaminate with their selfishness, their blinding obsession with my sister, their endless cruelty toward me. I thought, just for a few hours, they might remember they had another daughter, one who had just lost everything that mattered. But as I stared blankly at the altar, my mother leaned in close. Her strong perfume was suffocating, her voice a sharp whisper that cut through my grief like a blade. "You know," she murmured, her lips curling into that cruel half-smile she always saved just for me. "It would really help your sister if you used some of that insurance money for her car. She's been dreaming of a new one for years. Imagine how happy it would make her." I froze, the words echoing in the numb cavern of my mind. I thought I must have misheard. Grief had to be making me hallucinate. There was no other explanation. But when I turned to look at her, my mother's expression was calm, calculating, as if suggesting we carve up my husband's memory for spare parts was the most natural thing in the world. My father, sitting stiffly on her other side, refused to even look at me. He just muttered, "Don't be selfish. Your sister's needs are more important now than ever." My voice was a fractured, barely audible whisper. "My husband is dead. I can barely breathe and you're asking me for money." My mom sighed dramatically, a puff of annoyed air, as if I were the one being unreasonable, as if my profound pain was just an inconvenient obstacle. "We're just saying it's not like you need all of it. You don't have kids. Your sister is struggling too, you know. Don't make this all about you." The audacity, the sheer heartlessness of it, made my stomach twist into a tight, painful knot. The only man who had ever loved me unconditionally, the man who saw me when no one else did, lay in a box at the front of the room, and all my parents could think about was my sister's dream car. They didn't offer a single word of comfort. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't even glance at the casket, with a flicker of sorrow for the man who had made their forgotten daughter happy. My sister, sitting there in her perfect black dress, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She was perfectly made up, dabbing at dry eyes while sneaking glances at me, a tiny smirk tugging at her lips. It was a look of triumph, as if she already believed the money was as good as hers. As if my husband's death was nothing more than a convenient windfall for her next luxury toy. I sat there shaking, my hands balled into fists in my lap, my throat aching from holding back the scream that was clawing its way up. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to throw them all out into the street. But part of me was still in shock, unable to process that this was real. A small, naive part of me still hoped they'd snap out of it, that they'd suddenly realize how monstrous they were being. That hope died a swift, brutal death when my mom leaned in even closer, her breath hot and sour in my ear, and whispered, "Come on, dear. He's gone now. At least his death can do something useful." Something inside me snapped. In that single, horrifying moment, the grief that had been swallowing me whole was burned away, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. They weren't my family. They never had been. They saw me as a tool, my husband as a walking wallet, and his death as their golden opportunity. Every cruel thing they had ever done, every time they had pushed me aside from my sister, every casual insult, every reminder that I was less than, it had all been leading to this moment. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't break down. I sat there, with dry eyes, staring straight ahead at the polished wood of the casket, and in that heavy silence, surrounded by the scent of funeral lilies, I made myself a promise. My parents and my sister would regret this. They would regret every single moment of pain they had inflicted upon me. I would not just walk away this time. I would not forgive, and I would never, ever forget. They thought his death was their payday. They thought I would roll over and hand them the insurance money, letting them profit from my grief just as they had always profited from my humiliation. They had no idea who they had just created. My husband may have been gone, but his love had left me with something far stronger than money. It had left me with the courage to stop being their victim and start being their reckoning. And this time, I wouldn't just make them regret asking for that money. I would make them regret every single breath they had ever wasted looking down on me. The day after the funeral, the house felt like a tomb. The flowers from the service were already starting to wilt. On the kitchen counter, their sweet scent of lilies mixing with the stale air, making me feel sick. My husband's jacket still hung on the back of the dining room chair where he'd left it. His watch lay on the nightstand where he'd forgotten to put it away. Everything screamed his absence. But echoing louder than the silence was the memory of my mother's whisper. At least his death can do something useful. I spent hours sitting in the dark, my mind a torrent of memories, replaying every insult, every wound my family had carved into me over the years. The time they skipped my college graduation to celebrate my sister's new boyfriend. The birthdays they completely forgot while throwing lavish parties for her. Every Christmas morning where my gift was a thoughtless sweater to sizes too small. While she unwrapped diamond bracelets, my husband had been my shield, the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. And now, at the absolute lowest point of my life, they had shown me that they didn't just see me as worthless, they saw my husband's death as their winning lottery ticket. For the first time in years, I felt something other than sadness and grief. A cold, hard determination began to burn in my chest. This was not going to be like all the other times I let them walk all over me and win. They had spent their whole lives turning me into their punching bag, the forgotten daughter, the one who owed them everything while receiving nothing in return. But this time, they had gone too far. This time, I had something they wanted badly enough to drop their masks for. Money. I called the insurance company first thing the next morning. The agent was kind, his voice soft and patient as he went over the details of the policy. My husband had left everything to me, enough to secure my future, enough to give me stability after life had ripped everything away. But instead of thinking about my own security, all I could hear were my mother's words at the funeral, see my sister's smug grin, and feel the sting of my father's muttered command. Don't be selfish. They had made one thing perfectly clear. They would not stop. They would circle me like vultures, harassing and guilt-tripping me until I either gave in or broke completely. So I decided to give them what they wanted, but on my terms. I would feed them poison disguised as kindness. 2 days later, I invited my parents and sister to lunch at a quiet, upscale restaurant. They arrived dressed to impress, as if they were meeting a lone officer, not their grieving daughter and sister. My sister was all smiles, fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Oh, honey, you're holding up so well," she cooed, patting my hand as if I were a fragile child. My mother didn't even bother with the small talk. She cut straight to the chase. So, about the insurance money? I looked each of them in the eye, my face a mask of calm, my voice soft. "You're right," I said, watching their greedy eyes light up with anticipation. "I don't need it all. I've been thinking a lot about what's fair." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting them lean closer, like predators sensing a kill. "But fair," I added, a faint, cold smile touching my lips, "has never really been this family's specialty, has it?" They frowned, confused, waiting for me to continue. "I'll give you money," I continued, "but not for free. You've always said I was nothing, that I owed you everything for simply existing. So, let's make it official." I pulled a thick folder from my bag and slid it across the table. Inside was a contract, perfectly legal, drawn up by a lawyer I had hired the same day I learned about the policy. It stated that my parents and sister would receive a generous monthly allowance from me. The only condition was that they had to publicly sign a detailed statement of debt, a confession acknowledging every cruel thing they had done to me. It listed years of neglect, emotional abuse, their own words admitting they treated me as second best. The document was designed to be filed and made public if I ever chose to release it. At first, they laughed, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. But when I didn't join in, my mother's face flushed a deep, angry red. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "You expect us to sign this garbage? To admit to a bunch of lies just for a few dollars?" I leaned forward, my smile becoming sharper now. "It's not a few dollars. It's enough for a new car, a new wardrobe, and a dozen vacations for my perfect sister. Isn't that what you wanted? I'm just giving you what you've always demanded in return. My dignity, in writing. The money is on the table, but you're going to have to pay for it with your shame." Their silence was thick with fury and disbelief. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting between the pages of the contract, her greed clearly at war with her pride. My dad slammed his fist on the table, muttering curses under his breath. I remained perfectly calm, letting their anger wash over me. For the first time in my life, I had all the power, and I was never giving it back. I stood up and gathered my things. "Think it over," I said, sliding a pen on top of the folder. "You've spent my entire life making me regret being born. Now you can regret asking me for my husband's blood money. You will either sign the document, or you will watch every lie you've told about being the perfect family burn in public court documents." I walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce, exhilarating strength. They were cornered for the first time in their lives. They wanted my husband's money more than anything. Now, they would have to sell their pride to get it, and I would enjoy every single second of watching them choke on the taste of their own cruelty. 2 long weeks passed before my phone finally lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering, savoring the moment, knowing exactly what was coming. Her voice was sharp and brittle, dripping with a fake composure that couldn't hide her fury. "We've decided to sign," she said flatly, as if each word burned her tongue. "Your father and sister agreed. Just bring the money. We don't need any more of your theatrics." I almost laughed. They still thought this was a negotiation, that they could make demands in a deal where they held no cards. "Good," I said simply. "Tomorrow morning, my lawyer will be present. You'll sign. You'll get your first transfer, and then we will never speak again." They arrived at the lawyer's office dressed as if they were walking into a victory parade, not a public humiliation. My sister even had the audacity to whisper a joke as she passed me. Finally, something good came out of that tragic marriage. Of yours. I didn't react. I just slid the papers toward them and watched as their eyes skimmed over the legal text that laid bare decades of their emotional abuse and neglect, a full confession in their own words, ready for their signatures. Every word was true, every sentence a nail in the coffin of their precious reputation. My lawyer glanced at me once, a silent confirmation, and I gave a slight nod. The room was silent except for the harsh scratching of their pens as they signed away what little dignity they had left. When it was done, I calmly handed over an envelope. It didn't contain cash, just a single check for the first installment. Then I stood up to leave. Wait, my mom snapped, her voice shrill. Where's the rest? We expected more than this. I turned to her slowly, letting the cold, deep satisfaction finally show on my face. You'll get it, I said softly, just not the way you think. The very next day, their signed confession notarized and legally binding went public. I made sure of it. Every neighbor they had ever gossiped with, every friend they had boasted to, every colleague they had tried to impress with their act of being perfect parents, saw the truth in their own handwriting. The document detailed how they had neglected, belittled, and emotionally abused their own daughter for decades. How they had tried to profit off her husband's death without a single shred of remorse. By nightfall, their phones were blowing up, not with messages of sympathy, but with calls of disgust. Invitations to social events vanished overnight. My dad's old business buddies pulled out of every deal he had been clinging to. My mother's charity circles shunned her completely. My sister's fiancé dumped her publicly, stating he didn't want to marry into that mess of a family. The cherry on top was the monthly allowance they had signed their pride away for. It was legally tied to my own terms. I had the right to stop payments if they ever harassed me again. And every cent was documented as charity support for abusive parents, a public label they could never erase from their financial records. Weeks later, I drove past their once pristine house. The lawn was unkempt, the mailbox was stuffed with unopened bills, and their fancy cars were gone, sold off to try and recover from the financial ruin the scandal had caused. Yet the shame clung to them like smoke, a stain they could never wash off. They had thought my husband's death would fund their luxurious lifestyle. They thought they could leech off of me one last time and win. Instead, they had signed away the only thing they valued more than money, their precious image. Standing outside my own new home, a place my husband's love and foresight helped me buy, I watched my son, Eli, laughing in the yard, truly happy for the first time in months. I whispered to the wind, this is what he would have wanted, a life for us, far away from their poison. And for the first time since that funeral, I felt a deep, genuine peace settle over me. My parents hadn't just lost their payday, they had lost the mask they'd worn all their lives, their power, their reputation, and the right to ever stand over me again. They wanted my husband's death to be their gain. Instead, it became their total undoing.